So I think in recent memory, I would have to say that the West Coast Eagles rebuild has been one of the more controversial ones. Again, I'll be very, very honest. I have disagreed with a lot of the way of how the West Coast Eagles have rebuilt, over the last couple years. Again, I personally think, they needed to take a lot harsher action sooner and maybe move on from some of their veteran players, a lot sooner than what they did. Again, don't get me wrong, I don't think they needed to completely do what Richmond did, where Richmond had like 10 blokes retire in the last 2 years alone and told a bunch of other guys to explore their trade options. They really moved Daniel Rioli, Shea Bolton, Liam Baker, and Jack Graham on without any dramas at all. Again, I don't think the Eagles needed to do quite that to that extent, but I definitely think they had to kind of meet in the middle. Again, it's only just now, though, that the Eagles are, I think, really starting to see that they need to make some change. Again, yes, they've had a couple players retire like Jeremy McGovern and Dom Sheed, but you can actually tell they are now starting to force a couple of their older type of players to retire. Some of the players who aren't going to get any better or, aren't moving too far in their career. Again, Jaden Hunt was a player they, of course, just had retire. Again, I think it's pretty safe to say they probably gave him the tap on the shoulder and said, hey, mate, we're probably not going to bring you back. Time to retire. Again, they moved on from Jack Petrocelli. At the time of making this video as well, there are a lot of rumours and reports on Liam Ryan and that he might be potentially moving to St Kilda. No matter what his management say on social media, that is actually happening, and I believe he will be meeting with St Kilda, and those negotiations are happening. Again, West Coast seem like they're, finally starting to rebuild in the right direction, but there were a couple years there where they didn't really do a whole lot, and then a couple of things that they did were quite divisive, and I think some eyebrows have certainly been raised at. And again, you can just tell that people, a lot of people who worked for the West Coast Eagles, whether they were coaches or recruiters, have just been on different pages. For example, there have been a couple mistakes they've made. There's one big mistake which I'm going to look at that I think could bite them in the bum now going forward. But there's a couple of interesting ones. Again, before they drafted Harley Reid at pick 1, the year before that, they actually selected Ruben Jimby at pick number 7. Now, at the time they selected Ruben Jimby, they hoped he could become, one of the next really elite, big-bodied inside midfielders. Again, there were even some weird comparisons of him to Patrick Cripps. Again, some people didn't like the pick. They didn't believe he was worth pick 7, and some people judged it and said the only reason they took him was because he was a West Australian. And again, some people believe there were better players available they could have taken who were maybe Victorian. Again, at the end of the day, Ruben Jimby would play the next couple years of his career as an inside midfielder with the Eagles and would have some good games and some bad games. Again, what ended up happening though is the Eagles would actually go on to hire Andrew McQualter as their new coach, who had a very, very similar philosophy as his mentor, Damien Hardwick. And again, Andrew McQualter seems to go along with the belief of not really having taller inside midfielders who are slow and rely on their contested game. Again, Damien Hardwick never really had that at Richmond. It's only just now he's kind of got that at Gold Coast with Noel Anderson. But again, Andrew McQualter went by that belief and didn't like what he saw of Ruben Jimby. So he actually moved Ruben Jimby to the back line where, don't get me wrong, he's been okay. But for a guy who's going into his 3rd year as a bloke playing key back, who's now going into his 4th year next year, it almost could be up to the question of, well, shit, all those years ago now, we could have just drafted a key defender. Instead, we got a midfielder who our coach doesn't like to play in the midfield and is now moving him down back. Again, just seems like they're on a little bit of a different page here. Again, the other mistake that I think is the one that I'm kind of leading up to here and why I mentioned Andrew McQualter is one that I didn't know if it was going to hurt them fully at the time, but I think it could now. And that was the other tall inside midfielder that Andrew McQualter didn't like, which happens to be Jai Cully. again, out of West Coast rebuild in the last couple of years, they haven't actually had too many young players that have shown they could be very good footballers along the line. Definitely not as near many as what they probably would have wanted. But one player they actually had who showed some promising signs, even winning a Rising Star, did actually happen to be Jai Cully. Again, is Jai Cully one of the slowest players in the game? Yeah, don't get me wrong. He's one of the slowest players in the whole entire game. We have worked with Andrew McQualter's game style and how Andrew McQualter coaches. Probably not. But at the end of the day, with what we saw in 2025, with West Coast having, again, still not quite the development of their younger players they'd want, they had to play a ton of younger players that weren't ready and weren't anywhere near supposed to be actually debuting. You're telling me they could have had a guy like Jai Cully there who may have taken the next step with them, and even though he's slow and doesn't fit into the game style, he was still more ready and deserving of a game than what a lot of the West Coast players were given this year. So they go on to delist Jai Cully, right? Melbourne signed Jai Cully to go and train with them over the off-season. They pick him up, and Jai Cully steadily improves every single week in the VFL to the point where in the last couple games, they not only play Jai Cully, but by the end of the year, Cully actually ends up becoming their starting wing, was getting like 15, 16 disposals a game, playing actually pretty good defense. He ended up being a marking option for them across the ground. He even hit the scoreboard a couple of times, kicking 2 goals in one of their games. Earned himself a 1-year extension, and now looks like he could be the starting wing going forward for the Melbourne Demons next year onwards and actually be a very, very capable and solid role player for them. Again, when you take all of that into account, that Cully is probably going to play, I'm assuming, most games next year and will be a starting wing for Melbourne. When you take all that into account, it makes the decision by the West Coast Eagles even more confusing that they decided to pick some of the players they've got right now over a guy like Jai Cully. Like, some of the names. Jack Petrocelli. He barely played for the Eagles this year. He didn't play for the Eagles last year. Was terrible every time he stepped onto the ground this year. So many players like that who played over Jai Cully and didn't make any sense, right? And West Coast could have been playing Cully all of this year, and he may have taken his game even further than what he was able to do in the short time of Melbourne. And then again, it's like some other people might say maybe he was cut for other reasons. Maybe he's not that good, off-field, personality-wise, whatever it might be. And to that, again, I actually say that is insane bullshit, because I actually know Cully personally. Again, I haven't spoken to the guy for a minute now. I was in his class, all the above. I would say I was mates with him. I can confirm he's a very, very good guy. In my whole entire lifetime, he is the absolute hardest player hardest person I've ever seen work on his craft. Like, no one has ever worked harder than him that I have absolutely known. And I've known some absolutely hard workers over my time. This guy, during COVID, I remember I would see this guy running laps and laps, every single day. Like, I remember I went to the park earlier in the day and I watched this guy, running laps, and I said, hey mate, all of this, right? And then for some reason later on in the day, I went to the park again. I don't know why. I think one of the boys wanted to get down just for a kick. This guy was then doing kicking drills and stuff like that with his dad, working his way into it. Like, a year and a half later, he was drafted to the AFL. Those are the type of guys you want at your club. The hard workers who are great. Like, this guy is a very nice guy, got along with everyone. Guarantee you it would have been the same thing at West Coast. These are the type of guys you want at your club. And I think it was very strange that Andrew McQualter decided to delist him just because he didn't fit in his system. Didn't even give him a go in the system. They moved on from him. And I guarantee you there would have been a lot of people at West Coast who were probably thinking, look, we want to keep Cully around, but you also got to go with what the new coach is saying. If the new coach doesn't want him, you got to move on from him. So again, I think some mistakes have been happening with the Eagles on this rebuild. Teams make mistakes all the time, but I believe there were really big mistakes here. Again, just hiring a coach who, I think Andrew McQualter is a good coach, don't get me wrong, but some of the issues there of picking certain players over Cully in there, Ruben Jimby hasn't exactly been tried in the midfield. And I remember I'd start to watch the end of the year and watch this Eagles midfield get absolutely shredded and torn apart and just looked like they needed a contested guy down there. And I'm still watching Ruben Jimby get destroyed as a full back in this really young and inexperienced backline. I'm thinking, why is he not in the midfield right now helping out Harley Reid? What, because he's slow? Yeah, he's slow. But half the bloody West Coast midfield was slow, and I don't know why some of them were playing over him in that midfield. Again, I think a couple of mistakes like this will come back to haunt them. If I am right, Cully will probably be the starting wing for Melbourne next year. We'll probably play most games, especially with them looking like they might be going younger. Yeah, some weird mistakes by Eagles on this rebuild, and I think this will be one that will look to come and bite them in the bum. They're moving on from a very young guy who just came off a rising star not long before his delisting. Again, odd stuff in my opinion. Again, I would love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down below though. Do you guys agree with me? I just felt like making a little bit of a discussion video to get my thoughts and opinions off on some of the issues that I think have been having with the Eagles rebuild, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, whether you agree with me or not. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this down below. Again, subscribe to this channel for all those sports content news, my gaming/movie channel, all of the above will be getting linked in the description down below. Go follow me on Instagram if you haven't already as well. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Leave a like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.